Hey everyone, my name's Philip James. We're from North Wales Cannabis Social Club, and this is going to be our first podcast.
My name's Isaac. I'm the chairman at North Wales Cannabis Club.
So I'm basically helping out Isaac to get more media output for North Wales Cannabis Club, because we've recently been, both of us went down to patients at Parliament. We met lots of other social clubs around the country, and one of them we met was Durham, so shout out to Simba Carter. We're very inspired by what some of the other cannabis social clubs are doing with setting up educational programs for the public.
Their own collectives, their own models.
Yeah, and also doing more media output, like Simba Carter does a lot of podcasts himself, a lot of Facebook Lives as well. So we're just trying to chip in and do our part, really. So yeah, I've got my THC structure, and we got our North Wales logo there.
Created by Phil James.
We're going to be talking about Victoria Atkins and her husband Paul Kenward. Now, they are basically the origins of modern prohibition in the UK. They are pretty much behind this whole skunk rubbish.
Skunk was created over several generations of different strains. After countless hybrids, then skunk was born, which was called skunk number 1. And in the UK, cheese is one of the most popular strains, just because it's easier to grow than most others, just because it's a hardy outdoor plant. You could grow it in your outdoor weathers in summer, and it'd yield for you.
Yeah, I just want to chip in on that, because when I was first diagnosed with brain cancer, obviously I didn't have any connections, like I didn't know Isaac back then. I just had my first connection, and all they had was cheese, which is the strain that Isaac just mentioned. So that was halfway through my course of radiotherapy. Well, I'm living proof that even just using cheese, you can still get the entourage effect, because we must remember, and we must get the facts out there, that in cannabis there are over 400 cannabinoids. This whole THC and CBD, that the focus on just those two is such a small part of the whole picture, because those 400 cannabinoids all have unique anti-inflammatory features to them on a medicinal level. And so when I was consuming cheese through the early part of my treatment, I was still getting the entourage effect. And that's what made the difference when I had my first clear scan.
Cheese does contain a variety of cannabinoids, so that's definitely good.
So that's the thing, even with cheese, there's still the possibility of an entourage effect. It's the prohibitionists or the right-wing press, they'll try to make out that skunk is basically just THC on its own, which is complete bullshit. I should say is that Professor David Nutt is... he was basically the lead scientist appointed by the government in 2005, and he was very honest about the link between psychosis and high strength strains like skunk and cheese. But since then, his findings were exaggerated by the prohibitionists. The reason why they were obviously exaggerated is because his findings suggested that you would need around 5,000 users of high-strength skunk using cannabis daily for around 10 years, and that would only produce one person who has any symptoms of psychosis. Now, if you took 500 people who were alcoholics, in 10 years you'd have a lot more, problems than just one person with psychosis. So Victoria Atkins is the MP for Louth and Horncastle. The majority recently increased to 37.2%. That was in the election in 2017, in July, I think it was. She works in the Home Office. She's like a junior minister there. She took over from Sarah Newton, who was doing that role. Now, Sarah Newton is the MP for Truro and Falmouth. She only has a majority of 6.7%. So Sarah Newton didn't last very long in that position because she tried to suggest that alcohol is less harmful than cannabis, and for most people that's a laughable accusation. And it just goes to show that the prohibitionists, although they have made some gains recently with Victoria Atkins' increased majority, it shows that they're still running on fumes in terms of their content, because they just don't have scientific facts on their side. We know that Victoria Atkins is against legalisation of cannabis in any form of legalisation. She wants to keep prohibition in place. She's kind of known as the princess of prohibition. She has been known to say some...
this is to quote her.
Yeah.
Before she was appointed by the drugs minister, she said, "We are talking about gun-toting criminals who think nothing of shooting each other and the people who carry their drugs for them. What on earth does my honourable friend think their reaction will be to the idea of drugs being regulated? Does he really think that these awful people are suddenly going to become law-abiding citizens?"
Yeah, and so that's a ridiculous quote. And that was quite recently. I think that was in November, some debate. Now, she's done a few debates and things on YouTube, and she recently did one with a prohibitionist from the US. Now, in the US, they've also got this push and pull problem, like fighting prohibition and prohibition trying to dig its heels in. In the US, they have Jeff Sessions, who is probably the lead guy in terms of prohibition in the US. Now, Jeff Sessions has tried to labour the point that people who use cannabis are not good people. And you can see from the quote from Victoria Atkins that she's also trying to play the same dirty game of basically tarnishing our community, because we are basically humanists. We're progressives. When I went down to Parliament, it was the first time I'd had a big meet-up with the whole of the community, and I can honestly say I've met more geniuses, more smart, intelligent people in this cannabis community than I have in any community. So this whole thing, it's basically just, they're getting so desperate now that they're having to resort to smears and slander, because obviously they don't have any science to back up their arguments. But we can just as easily rebut it, because what we know these people are doing is they're costing people's lives by keeping prohibition in place, because it's thanks to cannabis and different strains and oils and so on that I have managed to stay in what's called homeostasis, which is normal bodily function. It's managed to keep rogue cancer cells from growing, and also been able to keep autophagy happening, which is basically where cancer cells start to eat themselves, and also apoptosis or apoptosis, which is where cancer cells commit suicide. I could probably do some 3D showing you guys that later. So the husband of Victoria Atkins is Paul Kenward. So he is also one of the main guys in British Sugar, and British Sugar is actually right next to the 40-acre cannabis greenhouse. Basically, he has the license to grow that amount of cannabis in the UK. So here we have this huge contradiction, and this is pretty much the bones of the story, is that she is a minister in the Home Office who's opposed to cannabis being legalised, even for medicinal purposes, because she believes that cannabis has no medicinal qualities, which would make my situation a bit bizarre because I'm still here. But so her husband, at the same time, is growing cannabis, and he's growing it for medicinal purposes because that's the GW Pharmaceuticals. And at that site, they are growing enough cannabis to produce extracts for Sativex and also a anti-epileptic drug that is probably still in testing. But what this shows is utter hypocrisy from the heart of prohibition in this country. So what we basically need, we're us at North Wales Cannabis Social Club, we want to reach out to the UK population and also the UK cannabis social clubs around the country to just become a bit more politically active, because the problem is politics can be really boring, and I've followed it for many years and I can understand why it's not appealing to young people. But the problem is nobody is immune to what happened to me. Nobody's immune to cancer. And the only way to fight against prohibition is to get involved in politics. Make sure you're registered to vote. Check who your representatives, check what they believe in. And if they don't support legalization of cannabis, then you can lobby them. You can contact them at writetothem.com. All you do there is you just type in your postcode and it will show you up a list of all your local representatives. It will show you all your councillors, all your AMs, even your MEPs, and most importantly, your MP. Now, I did the same a couple of weeks ago because we knew that Patience at Parliament was coming up. And so I wanted to make sure that my local MP here in Flint is on side. And unfortunately, he railed against it for quite some time until I went to the North Wales Press, which is the Daily Post here. They were very supportive. Jez Hemmings, who was the main journalist there, he contacted David Hansen, my MP, and he went from originally saying that he was going to oppose the Elizabeth Bryce bill, which is to legalise medicinal cannabis or deschedule it from Schedule 1. He said he was no longer going to oppose it, but he would now just abstain, which is still a win for us because every vote that's not against legalisation is a win for us.
Well, Paul Kenward is the director of British Sugar, isn't he?
Yes, he's the director of British Sugar, and for me, that's two strikes because I'm on a ketogenic diet to also help make sure that I don't have a recurrence of cancer. The ketogenic diet works in a similar way to how the cannabinoids in cannabis work against cancer, in just simply being neuroprotective for healthy brain cells and being cytotoxic to cancer cells. Now, British Sugar, obviously they have a vested interest in pushing this highly addictive substance onto the British public because the food industry, they obviously want to sell their products, and what way to sell a product easier than if you make your product more addictive, and that's exactly what sugar is going to do. So as a general public health advocate, I'm just generally against his line of work, in basically the fact that he's for British Sugar and the fact that he's supporting prohibition of cannabis in the way that he is having this double standard where we are not allowed to grow cannabis in our community, but he's allowed to grow cannabis because it's for a pharmaceutical, which is not working out anyway because they're just producing duds. For example, Sativex, nobody's prescribing that. It's too expensive. It's like, what?
It's about 10 times the street price of a gram, an extracted gram.
Yeah, and like we in the cannabis community in the UK, throughout the UK social clubs, nobody's overcharging people, and yet they're overcharging the NHS. And that's the last thing the NHS needs at the moment. So, I mean, our agenda is that we want the right to grow cannabis because our community has the experience to grow it medicinally in the most effective ways. We also, the cannabis social clubs are becoming increasingly organised in that every major town and city has one now that you can join on Facebook. But even better, we are regulating our own community with a higher administration. So we make sure that scammers don't get very far in the UK cannabis social clubs because it's all about patient safety and just people's right to health. And obviously that's a major part of what we want to do at North Wales Cannabis Social Club.
So the MP that's not enthusiastic about regulation, her opinion on her husband growing the 45 acres of cannabis is, she says it's a very different substance to a psychoactive cannabinoid in cannabis, which it is.
But there's still THC in there.
Yeah. They're just being so dishonest. They all contribute to many medicinal benefits and ailments to many illnesses.
We should also mention that THC doesn't have to be psychoactive. I mean, there's
THCA, which is the unactivated version.
Yeah. So that is also what is often used for children that have unfortunately been diagnosed with cancer.
Seizures.
Yeah, for seizures and so on, like Alfie Dingley in the news recently, who was denied THCA by the Home Office. So the fact that they're even railing against THCA just makes no sense because they're saying that all these things are psychoactive when we know that there's a THC version that's non-psychoactive, and that's scientific fact. We should also mention that skunk is just one strain.
One strain alone.
Yeah, and recently there's been another prohibition push story by GW Pharmaceuticals, which was, well, they funded the study, which says that around 95% of police seizures of cannabis is high THC skunk. That doesn't add up. I mean, we know the community. We know what's out there. We know there's dozens of strains. It can't just be one. It'd be very unlikely with all the seizures that happen across the UK that it's just one strain that's found. And there's
thousands of strains, and every day people create their own genetics, which means that's another strain.
Yeah, and I mean, there's medicinal strains like Northern Lights,
Shark Shock,
Jack Hura, Durban Poison, I guess. I mean, obviously they have all these, I guess, imaginative names, but it's better than calling it something boring like Sativex. Also, we should mention, as we were talking about THCA, the non-psychoactive version of THC, this was what Jeff Ditchfield was arrested for trying to provide the mother of a dying child with.
You might have seen it on Sky News.
Yeah, he would have. He actually said on Sky News that it was THCA, so he didn't say that it was THC.
He pulled out his pocket and he said, I intend to supply this to a mother of a dying child.
He basically put the onus on the police to whether it was up to them whether they wanted to arrest him for that. And obviously they must have followed him towards the end and got involved. But it's a shame that the Met Police have done that because they're acting against their own interests there. I mean, we're lucky in both North Wales Cannabis Social Club and the guys over at our friends in Durham, we both have progressive police crime commissioners. A big part of what we're doing here is we're trying to improve science communication and to dispel some of the lies and dishonesty that comes from the prohibition lobbies.
The stigma attached.
And the stigma attached, because this whole thing about people who use cannabis being bad people. Well, the fact is, I get contacted by dozens of people every week that have been recently diagnosed with cancer. And it's not fair on our community if it's only an issue for the public when a serious disease affects them. This should be on everyone's radar, really, because nobody is immune from diseases. You don't want to put yourself in a situation where if you get diagnosed with a serious disease, you have no contacts and you know so little about it, because that exposes you to the black market that's not regulated by the UK Cannabis Social Clubs. If you go to those people, you can end up getting scammed. You can be sold fake oil. You can be sold something that is potentially harmful to you, something that's not tested, something that's not bred right, something that's not even anything to do with cannabis.
For example, it could be a mouldy batch of cannabis.
Yeah.
Extracted with isopropyl. You won't know the difference at the end result.
Yeah, and another problem with the lack of regulation is that if you go to somebody that's going to supply you with something that's not regulated by the UK Cannabis Social Clubs, you could end up with something that has insufficient amount of cannabinoids in it to actually be therapeutic in any way.
Like the Holland and Barrett CBD, for example.
Yes, this is a huge problem.
Holland and Barrett right now are selling a 0.275% CBD tincture for about $19.99 for a 10ml bottle. And that's 2.75 milligram per 10ml.
Yeah, and it's just
That's horrendous.
Just one cannabinoid. So that completely stops you getting any possibility of having the entourage effect, which is the most therapeutic aspect of medicinal cannabis.
When, for example, you can buy 1,000 milligrams of 99.8% isolated CBD for £20 more than you would be buying the Holland and Barrett CBD for. It's not great. It might be okay for people that struggle with tiny bits of anxiety through the day, and they might be able to drop a full dropper full of olive oil on the mouth, and it might alleviate that, but it's not going to help. Alongside THC, like you're reading on the internet, people say, "Oh, CBD, it works. I will buy this."
Yeah, I mean, I should say from my point of view, my experience is that cancer is what's known as a multi-heterogeneous disease, where it can spread due to multiple different reasons. Like, it can find ways to keep growing, and that means we call them pathways, and you have to block all these pathways to stop the cancer growing. If you're treating cancer with just one cannabinoid, then that means you probably, if any, you've probably blocked just one pathway, and that's not enough.
You need to stimulate the CB1 and CB2 receptors.
So the CB1 and CB2 receptors are part of our endocannabinoid system. So right now, me and Isaac are producing cannabis in our own bodies, and so are all of you. So this endocannabinoid system is what we have evolved to have over time. So as we were talking about Jeff Ditchfield, he was unfortunately arrested at Patience for Parliament just for trying to help out a mother of a dying child. I've been reading his book, the Medical Cannabis Guide book. I'm almost at the end of it now. Yes, I'm a slow reader, unfortunately. But I really recommend that more people get this, because this has educated me much more than because I already thought I was starting to understand cannabis much better, but this has really enlightened me further. And also, it's really made me wish I could just grow cannabis, because it's got so many good ideas in here on how to make the most medicinal strains. Yeah, so certainly recommend getting that. And a big shout out to Jeff Ditchfield, because he is such a brave figurehead in our community. Yeah, so we just want to thank everyone's support for helping our movement and to fight prohibition. Please like and share this podcast. We encourage all the other cannabis social clubs out there to do more things like this. Do your own podcast and just put them out there, and we'll help you to promote them as much as possible. If we all chip in together, and because we're all in this movement as one, then we can fight prohibition more effectively than if we're just all in these little silos. So yeah, just want to thank everyone for all your support from North Wales Cannabis Club.
Thank you. If you'd like us to answer some questions for you on these podcasts, please just send them in to me personally, or Phil, or through the Facebook, and we'll answer them on the next podcast.
Yeah, and
we'll try our best to answer them.
Yeah, and just if you want to join our group, if you're in North Wales, just go to just type in on your Facebook search North Wales Cannabis Social Club. We have 2 pages, don't we? We've got one for discussions and another for just promotion.
This is the logo that's on the Facebook page.
Yeah. Okay, so thanks very much, everyone, and hope you have a wonderful week, and we'll see you again.
Thank you.
See ya.